Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Jay Dyer back on the show. Of course, Jay is the proprietor of Jay's Analysis, jaysanalysis.com.
Part 2 of an interview with Jay Dyer on postmodernism, liberalism, and culture creation.
But nevertheless, during the Cold War and beyond, we thought this defector Yuri Bezmenov said that the winding down of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union was fake. They're going to infiltrate us, and they already have through gradual demoralization. Hitting on some real points. He in his talk he addresses real phenomena that we're seeing going on. So it's on one level it seems very 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 possible that this is going on. But in your talk about Rockefeller cultural Marxism, your review of Red Sparrow. And you're saying this is happening it's not the Russians that are doing this. It's Wall Street, it's Hollywood, it's the Ford Foundation, it's the Rockefeller Foundation, it's the universities. Yep. The enemy is within, right?
Yeah, and if we want to connect it to Marxism and to the party, then we're talking about Frankfurt School figures who were brought over by the OSS. Mm-hmm. So there's your Marxist connection, and it was the Macy Group. The request of Bertrand Russell, Rockefeller Foundation, OSS, and then CIA, who were all about these guys. And this is why the CIA backed modernist abstract art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's of course
because of these Frankfurt School characters.
Yeah, and that's in the cultural Cold War. You want to read about that?
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because at your recommendation, I got that book
because that goes into detail how it's done. How newspapers are used.
Yeah, Congress of Cultural Freedom.
And there is I'm reading E. Michael Jones's book, John Cardinal Krall and the Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about the foundations and their role in the sexual revolution. But he gives an excellent summation on just how the foundations are used as a weapon of subversion. How it works. Foundations work with the government and the media to legitimize something that would be considered so wacko a few years before. And he talks about Rene Wormser and the Carol Reese Kidney, their investigation with what the foundations were doing. And it's kind of funny because even then, they identified it as sort of a communist conspiracy, and they weren't quite exactly sure what. There was something there they didn't quite identify. It's almost like McCarthyism, where it got misidentified for a reason. And
this is John Bird's type stuff.
Yeah, where it wasn't at one level it was because there were communists in the State Department.
Right.
But it turns out the whole communist thing was set up by the West, the whole Cold War, the Soviet Union, the Russian Revolution. But he's talking about the Reese Committee hearing. And Rene Wormser was a book that I think Foundations in Their Power. He wrote a book in 1957 about this.
Wow.
So I'll read the article. I'll read the paragraph. You bear with me, but this is a wonderful summation how the foundations are engines of subversion. These are domestic, and this is the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, all very American, all very Western. But he goes, Rene Wormser, Reese's legal assistant, throughout the hearings, documented in a book published in 1957, not only the dangers posed by foundations to the institutions of the Republic, but also the influence those foundations and their political allies were bringing to bear on the nation's cultural institutions. The great foundations, Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, were for the most part founded as a result of the New Deal as an attempt to prevent the flow of family money into the coffers of the federal government under the tax policies instituted by Roosevelt. Created from wealth of this country's major capitalists, the foundation soon applied the techniques of cartel and the trust to the flow of information and reconfiguration of culture. The foundations would put up money, which would serve as venture capital in the politics of change. Foundations like those run by the Rockefeller brothers would fund projects like the Kinsey sex surveys, which would have been otherwise impossible to support given the constraints of democratically elected government or the simple satisfying of market forces. The foundations would fund research the foundations would fund research they found congenial, and this almost invariably involved instigating social change away from a position of congruity with the moral law. They involved more often than not, as the Kinsey studies did, the substitution of scientific data for moral principles, and then when the project had received a modicum of public acceptance, foundations would turn the funding of the projects over to the government. This was by and large the mechanisms of cultural revolution in this country. The foundation would fund the undermining of some law, generally having to do with sex, the family, morals, or religion. The courts would remove any legal roadblocks. The press would proselytize for whatever the social change entailed, giving widespread dissemination of the scientific surveys which the foundations funded. And eventually the government would set up programs based on what the foundations proposed, funded by government money. The government's involvement in contraception is one instance for this general rule that we will examine in greater detail later. I thought there was a great explanation of the mechanism, how this is done. It's not a diverse, heterodox situation where you have great minds thinking alike. It's a closed circle, and by golly, it's a conspiracy of cultural subversion and revolution. You know?
Yes, and I think when you look at the Collier and Horowitz book, you will see that there's really no escape, because this is authorized biography, that there's really no escaping I would say probably they had the most influence when it came to these topics across the board. And I mean, I think that book really demonstrates that, because you have, the Rockefellers being behind the establishment of the CFR, the money property for the UN, the cultural subversion through a lot of these foundations, and certainly other families too. I'm not saying that, there weren't the Whitneys and all the different ones that the DuPonts and the different the Oppenheimers, Quigley lists all these families as well, and in many ways, because the leftist perspective is so useful for social engineering, that's of course where you also get the tie-in, at least in the 20th century, early and then mid 20th century, you get the tie-in of the rise of Jewish power. So I'm not saying that. I think these are common interests, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the WASP Jewish Alliance for
yes, and I forgot what I was going to say. So
a good example of this is the American Jewish Committee's working with MK Ultra. Yeah, so there's a tie-in there, American Jewish Committee and the Kinsey study, and also, what's his name?
Yes.
Herbert Marcuse, and all this stuff about the sexual revolution.
Yes, another Frankfurt School character, correct.
Yeah,
Marcuse, and I also did, in case anybody missed it, a talk on Habermas. I also did a Habermas, who is another important Frankfurt School character. And as I've said many times, my professor, my philosophy advisor, had studied under a guy who studied under Habermas. So a lot of people,
I'm sorry, you're breaking up? You there? Hello?
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Okay, we're fine. I'm sorry, you broke up at Habermas. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think a lot of people aren't familiar with maybe the distinctions in Marxism, and certainly from a big scope vantage point, the distinctions aren't that important. But in a sense, they kind of are, because you do get differentiations. I mean, this is why Stalin doesn't like Trotsky. There are distinctions between Marxism proper and what becomes Eastern Bloc Marxism. So sometimes the distinction is made, I think you and I have talked about this a long time ago, between historical materialism and dialectical materialism. The Frankfurt School position is really about culture critique, as it might be in the German, and the idea of critiquing the critique. This is faithful to the Leninist, Trotskyist type perspective, where there's a big importance on subversion of culture. And now I'm not an expert in Stalinism or anything like that. I'm not a Stalin apologist. I don't believe that Stalin was a hero or anything like that. But there is a distinction, and this is why Stalin supposedly had Trotsky killed. Because Stalinism attempted to have a little bit of a conservative position on things like morals and family. And this is why, you can look this up. I learned this a long time ago. the party's line under Stalin was, for example, had laws against homosexuality. Mm-hmm. Now, with Leninists and Trotskyites, they were pro-homosexual. They were pro-abortion, very radical, especially for that time. So these views are not always the same. In other words, I don't think we can see Marxism as it is a conspiracy, absolutely, and it is fostered by banks. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's monolithic, and these people all hate each other too. They fight with each other and have each other killed. And if you go deep into studying Marxism, you'll learn this kind of stuff. And the same thing happened in the French Revolution. The revolutionaries who were sort of the merchant noble class, they were fighting the Jacobins, and they were killing each other because the Jacobins were the straight up hardcore Weishaupt style communists. So these groups fight and hate each other at times. And the reason this is all relevant is because this gets into kind of what Mark Hackert and I were talking about in his Rothschild piece, was that you do have what appears to be a difference of schools of Marxism, particularly over culture. And this is why the Frankfurt School becomes so focused on in a lot of our critiques, is because they were central in undermining American society in the West. And that's documentable. It's very clear. There's not much debate about it when you look at it, read their writings, look at what they say. And the reason I say all this is because Habermas, in his book, Theory and Praxis, Habermas says, hey, all we're doing is continuing the revolutionary tradition for the last 300 years. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, he says the American Revolution was just an older flavor of revolution. So, you've heard me probably in talks and whatnot make this argument about, well, Aldous Huxley says in the introduction to Brave New World that Brave New World is just the culmination of all the revolutions back to the scientific revolution, French Revolution. And guess what? Habermas says the exact same thing in his book. He says that our view is perpetual, total, constant revolution and critique of the old, and in other words, the revolution constantly eats itself. Mm-hmm. He says that's necessary. That's part of, because they believe it's part of kind of reality itself. Reality is this dialectical process of, you only have progress through destroying what you were yesterday. And we are seeing that when we see the idea that we can be any gender that we want. We can make up genders. We can say that we're any species. That is the culmination of the revolution right there. Constant. And then transhumanism obviously is the next logical step.
Yeah, it's constant flux.
Yes, I think and I got it wrong. I think the last time I said Trotsky. I think it's Lenin. No, wait.
Trotsky was constant revolution, permanent revolution.
Yes.
Which then, of course, the Trotskyites become the neoconservatives, and we see that here. Yeah.
So this is why you see neoconservative policy being perpetual destabilization.
Yeah, and that's the whole creative destruction.
Yes.
Concept.
Exactly. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so that's how we relate it back to Collier and Horowitz, is that if you're David Rockefeller, you want to do what works. You're not interested in necessarily the ideology or the school. You're interested in what works. And so if these plans work the best to achieve your goals, then that's what you're gonna implement. And that's how they view it. They view these ideologies as what did Bertrand Russell say? He said the Soviet social experiment is running tremendously in Russia.
Yeah, and of course the revelations regarding the Rothschild, being a Soviet agent, of course that's probably it misrepresents the relationship there. Is the Soviet Union was congenial to the Rothschild interest for a certain phase, and then that ended.
Correct, and I think Mark explained that well, and that I think solves part of the puzzle piece with Stalinism, is that it relates to the creation of the nation state of Israel, and once the Israelis swung more towards, I guess, under Ben Gurion or later, towards Atlanticist side of things, that's when, Stalin started to be a, quote, problem.
Yeah.
Because he was fine prior to that, right? He was like the good guy. Mm-hmm. Uncle Joe, right?
Uncle Joe at Yalta. So, but you talked about this thing called the Changing Images of Man, this report that came out of the Stanford Research Institute, which should have spelled out what we've seen unfold in the past 30, right. 40, 50, 40 years. And this comes out, when we talk about conspiracy or culture creation and the people who are skeptical of to what extent is culture created, manipulated, is this just sort of society unfolding, or is it some sort of like, some sort of entropy going on there, things fall apart? But right. there is evidence that this stuff has been, culture and society is being pushed in certain directions, being manipulated. One thing is because the mechanisms are there with mass media, mass education, these things. So obviously the public is easily manipulated by what's at the disposal of the oligarchs. Technologically speaking, mass communication has always been used for mass manipulation. That's why it was developed and studied. But in the Changing Images of Man, you have an institute, the Stanford Research Institute, which is, these are the guys that consult with government, with entertainment, like with Disney, these things. So they're big into
right.
this. So what's revealed with the Changing Images of Man, and then subsequently with this Aquarian conspiracy, which I think is related to it, by Marilyn Ferguson.
Yes. This was a book written, if I recall, late 70s, early 80s, so not too long after Changing Images of Man had been published as well in the 70s. And Marilyn Ferguson was a proponent. This is not a conspiracy book. This is a book that calls it a conspiracy and is promoting it.
That's right. She was an advisor to Ted Turner and Al Gore.
Yeah, much like
so there you go.
Yeah, much like H.G. Wells saying it's the open conspiracy, and he's like, "I'm all for it. Join us, join us in this conspiracy." And this is kind of what Marilyn Ferguson was proposing, and she talks about the overhauling and maybe infiltration is too strong of a word. The revolution in consciousness that will occur in every area of life. And so all institutions will be changed. Now, again, Marilyn Ferguson is not a commie. Okay, she's not at the behest of Moscow or something like that. She is a Western. She's pro-corporation. She's pro-big business, as you just mentioned. Look who she's consulting with and working with. So she's not a commie. She's very much a Western apologist. But it's a Western apologist in the sense of where the globalist elite want to take things. And she, I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily say she's at the top of the pyramid, but this book is essentially a Luciferian book, quite consciously, because she sees the world entering a new paradigm shift of consciousness and all this kind of new age gobbledygook speak. But really this is just a transformative process at the behest of the oligarchs. But her book includes, all the ideas of like opening one's consciousness through LSD, and so she's still kind of continuing on the Tim Leary gospel, right, in her own way, saying that okay, we've had this period of the 60s sexual revolution, cultural revolution. Let's continue that revolution, even under this coming yuppie phase, right? We don't have to toss away the revolution because of corporations and big business. What we need to do is take the revolution into corporations and big business. In other words, make those institutions channels and conduits for the revolution. And this is why you start seeing weird things in the 80s and 90s of corporations adopting like yoga and you're going to do Tai Chi retreats, and we're going to take you on a corporate retreat to this ashram and all this kind of stuff. That was all consciously top down decided upon. That people have talked about, we've talked about this, maybe you and I, but this is what happens in Mad Men. by the end of Mad Men, Draper leaves the corporate world to go to Esalen Institute.
Mm-hmm. And I think in there they suggest that he's the man behind the Coca-Cola ad in the early 70s. I like to teach the world to see. exploiting the youth hippie image, but that's cute, yeah.
Yes, and what this shows is that revolution. Her book is a great continuation of this notion of. I mean, I would almost say read it along with Weird Things Inside the Canyon, because what she's admitting from the establishment vantage point for the corporate education, establishment world is the same kind of thesis that Dave McGowan has for, Hollywood and music and Weird Scenes, except, Dave's critiquing it. He's not an apologist per se. Marilyn is an apologist, and Changing Images of Man does come up because, she's promoting basically everything that we're seeing today. So in many ways it was prophetic. It was, she's talking about how we're going to have, the feminizing of all of the workplace, and we're going to have, the consciousness of, Earth as, a living being, Mother Earth type stuff, and it was early, the kind of, propaganda of Club of Rome type stuff, but on a more, popular scale for U.S. readers or quote intellectuals. And interestingly, she talks about, Teilhard de Chardin. She talks about these characters that you wouldn't necessarily expect, religious figures like him having such an important role in this quote shift in consciousness.
Yeah, and you also mentioned how she even suggests, in the Aquarian Conspiracy, or maybe it's in Changing Images of Man, or even how media, they'll promote touchy feel-good stories. It's going to affect the type of television you watch, the programming it's going to put out, even the clothes and fashion. So all these things that we think are spontaneous or sort of a dialectical thing with consumerism and consumer want. People are being told... I mean, if you really think that people really independently decide what they want, explain to me the phenomenon of the pet rock, right? Yet people buy it, and that's a relatively harmless example of that. But it's just right. I mean, that's so. So with the music, like with disco music, well, that's going to go great with the '70s and the cocaine and going around and around in circles, wasting your youth. Like you're at a gay disco, as Michael Jones says, with no direction, no purpose to thing, just a one night stands and these things, and the music's going to lead you in that direction and these things. And as like you said, Dave McGowan shows just how the music's being manipulated, the imagery is being manipulated, the archaic revival, with the buckskin outfits they're wearing in the '60s and these things, and this all goes back to that whole idea of how society is being manipulated. All the most radical ideas are being marketed and spread to, corporations, which are
Did you see that? Did you get a chance to catch that documentary that I posted that was from like 2002 on Unabomber and MKUltra on the internet?
That's the one that was like originally in German or something.
Yes.
I've only seen parts of that, but yeah, he touches on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets into the Esalen Institute and people from the Esalen Institute and their connection to the Vienna Circle, right? So here we have philosophy coming into play and the idea of, now that we've deconstructed everything, is everything meaningless? Oh no, guess what? Now that we've taken you to nihilism and meaninglessness, we're going to give you a bunch of new age gobbledygook and occult practices that can make you feel better. And that's And
this is kind of a situation, Michael Jones saying how this transvaluation, how they were talking about this movie, The Shape of Water.
Yes.
And they were talking about...
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So they're talking about the movie The Shape of Water and the transvaluation, but that's a whole other... What I want to
this is like John C. Lilly comes back from the dead as as Neptune or something.
Well, they immediately made it's just like this is an update for Creature from the Black Lagoon, where in the 1950s the idea
he's a monster.
Yeah, he's a monster, and this now because in the here we are in the 21st century, the second decade of 20. Now you can love another animal. You can love a fish man. But he said, the whole point about this transvaluation thing is that you can advocate genocide, i.e. population control. You can advocate, or abortion, or you can engage in, free love and have, open sex and these things. And you can still be a good person because you don't eat meat.
Yes,
right?
This is, there's a text in Ezekiel, I think, that illustrates this, where the Israelites had rejected God's law, and God says something to I don't remember the exact text, but he says something effective. Well, you don't like my law, I'm going to give you new laws, and you're not going to like those new laws because they're going to come from, some Babylonian tyrant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these new laws are they're going to be absurd, and they're going to be actually a yoke that you can't bear. And that's an absolutely excellent example. The new civic laws and codes of how you're, quote, moral.
Like
which, by the way,
sexual harassment laws and these things.
Yes.
Speech
and
codes.
This is the social justice download, the latest social justice download. And veganism. I'm glad you mentioned that because, this is something Alvin Toffler, another one of our globalist planners, said would be, manipulated and utilized.
Yeah. Did you listen to the interview that Chris had last winter? Chris from Cokesbusters on the two vegans. Oh,
the debate with I saw that debate. That was really ridiculous. But
quoting the World Health Organization as an authority.
Yep.
They're
That's exactly what I thought. Yeah.
They're like, man, they're the ones that manage the world's health.
Yeah.
I was like, really?
JF actually has an interesting debate. Obviously, I don't accept all of JF's atheistic positions, but he does essentially, I think refute the one of the top YouTube vegan guys. By, kind of pointing out, we are predators, we have incisors, we are made to eat meat.
We need protein in these. And this is the kind of the trap you get into, because what happens is the vegans will point out corporate farming, mass farming,
which is true.
Which is all true, the processed foods you eat and these things. But of course the answer to that isn't veganism. It's the answer is going back to more local-based food sources, these things,
Well, this is a quick anecdote. I went to a cave recently. There's one of the world's largest cave networks is in Kentucky. And I went to one of the caves and took a tour. And what was interesting was that they kind of had these federal laws in place about what you can and can't do in the cave, right? And what was weird was that the cave tour guide person, she constantly spoke of the cave as alive. And she says this, she's like, the cave grows, and the stalactites and the stalagmites, they grow, an inch every, 50 years or whatever. So it's actually a federal offense to break them off because it kills the cave. She kept speaking this way, and I'm like, the cave is not alive.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this more, and I saw some videos of, some nature videos and how common it is now for people to speak of and treat animals as if they were persons. I mean, you see this with girls who, are 25, 30, single or married. They don't have kids, but they have pets, and they treat their pets like people. And this has always been a pet peeve of mine. If I've been on a date, and this has happened multiple times in my 20s, I'd go on a date and I meet the girl, pick her up, and she's got a pet dog, and she treats the dog like a person. That's pet peeve number one. And then she lets the dog lick all over her face. It's disgusting. And I was just like, I don't want to kiss you. But the main point is that, where's that dog's tongue?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
In his butt. So, I don't want to kiss you on this date. Please go wash your face off or something. But
it is.
But they have this trend now of this has been going on for a few decades, and you see the weird thing of they take their pets to pet hotels that are actual hotels, and and I think this is just a manifestation of a society that has completely gone insane, where we treat people like animals, and we treat animals like people.
Yeah, more inversion.
Yeah,
get more inversion, and
caves are not alive.
They're not. No. An example of that would be, you hear endless news reports with Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels' lawsuit, various women. And we all know Donald Trump's reputation was a womanizing, billionaire, alpha male womanizer, and so no one's shocked that years ago he had might have had these liaisons with these models or whatever they were. But this is being treated like it's a scandal, and maybe in a previous era it would be a scandal. But these are the same people who tell us that we can't judge transvestites.
Yes, exactly.
So, and by what moral universe, what he's doing is wrong. Yet we're supposed to accept homosexuality and all manner of deviancy in the name of diversity and tolerance. Where's the tolerance for being a philanderer? But what moral objection do you have to this? Then we're told we have to tolerate people who identify as the sex they're not and dress as women and engage in all types of deviant sex practices.
Yeah, I always ask the social justice warrior this. They start harping on something of racism or something. I said, well, on what basis is racism wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't believe that we should, unfairly judge people.
Yeah.
But I want to know, if you're a moral relativist, why racism is wrong.
Yeah. Well, how is it wrong? But it's one of these things where, racism is wrong because it can be used by that issue is used to further atomize society and same with sexual politics. These things get into the most intimate of relationships and these things. And
people were pointing the same argument that you're making with Me Too and Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
And it was like, you're in movies stripping your clothes off and, showing your boobs to the whole world. And now you're suddenly a Puritan who's,
a sex outsider becomes a raging feminist.
Exactly, right.
The psychology behind that. I go to Hollywood, and listen, for every one actress who sells herself out, there's maybe 9 that go home and get an honest job. And that's what you should do. You shouldn't go into entertainment or Hollywood. That's not a good thing to do. I'm sorry. And unless you can tell me where he's forced you or threatened to hurt you, it's not really a crime. It's a transaction. Just don't be an actress. I'm sorry. You don't have a right to be an actress. There's no right to be a star. But, it's just one of these things where, again, that also takes the attention. Take the attention from this Harvey Weinstein character, who's this disgusting individual. You could say borderline predator, perhaps. But then they pathologize all male behavior. We're all guilty of this.
Right, and that's just similar to situation with Trump. It's not about moral problems. It's about because he's a male. It gets turned into it's toxic masculinity is what they're saying.
Yeah.
And now universities are trying to implement, bizarre policies I'm trying to remember what I was reading the other day. Something about some university was like not going to allow men or probably white males, into some certain area. Like they can't go to this section of the university because it was, going to be designated a white male free safe zone or something like that.
But they're handing out condoms and birth control at the student union building, student services.
And also race isn't real. But
white people
are white. Right.
Race isn't real, but white people aren't allowed.
Right.
So
white people aren't allowed to our race isn't real rally.
So again, it's all part of, it's not logical.
Men aren't allowed to our gender as a biological construct rally.
Well, that's another thing that he pointed out. That interview I had about that guy who wrote the book *Sapiens*. The
Yeah, he did. He made a great point on that about biology.
They deny he's all scientific. Then it denies the most basic fundamental fact of biology is male female. Well, that's a construct, you see.
Mm-hmm.
That's a construct.
Exactly. Yeah.
Surveying all this, I mean, you've been looking into this stuff for the better part of 20 years, correct?
Yeah, actually, my entrance to this was when I was 18 and I started reading the Bible. So I read the Gospel of Matthew and I read the Psalms, and those, I mean, I read the Bible in total, but those stick out to me as really kind of waking me up to maybe life has meaning. Maybe there's, more to life than just partying. And that led to, other books on theology and understanding the text and trying to figure out the Bible is a complex book. So, it takes many years to get a handle on it and to get a good grasp of what it's talking about. And, around the same time, I decided, well, I'm going to have to pick something to study in school, and I don't really care about, engineering or practical type stuff. So, the closest thing would be, religious studies or theology, or philosophy. So that's kind of what, led me into philosophy. And at the same time, I remember at the Christian bookstore that I used to go to when I was 18, there were Tex Mars books of all people. And I remember reading his book on cults, and I remember picking up some books on the New Age movement. And there was Dave Hunt, who's kind of this radical Protestant guy, conspiracy theorist guy, and had all these theories about the UN, and turns out actually some of what he's a goofus, so I don't take him seriously, but some of what was in there was correct. And I remember this was, kind of pre-internet. Nobody was really using the internet yet, but, so I didn't really have internet stuff to look at. So, this was kind of my entrance into questioning the United Nations, which in high school I'd always heard was this great noble organization, and they were, doing all this good stuff. And so for me, it started with, beginning to read the Bible, beginning to, try to understand what is philosophy. You read, Plato's Apology, you start to learn about logic. And I decided to pursue those things, at a academic level. And, naturally conspiracy kind of tagged along, because it does in many ways relate to this stuff, because you think, well, is there a spiritual reality, or are we just here and now? Is it just material? If there's a spiritual realm, is it something that's real? Is there good and evil? How do we live our lives? So all these kind of questions that probably a lot of people hopefully ask when they're 18, 19, 20. And, it opened the door. It opened the door to, a rabbit hole, you could say. And 20 years later, I'm definitely glad that I went down the rabbit hole. I think I'm a lot better off and a lot happier. Even though, yes, the information can be dark and daunting at times. I've always believed that you come out better in the long run, kind of facing up to truth and facing up to challenges and fears, challenges to your worldview, your paradigm. It's really the only way to make progress. One of the things that I learned early on in philosophy was the idea that truth should really be the goal. Truth is more important than anything in life. I remember reading Augustine saying that back when I was about 20, that his whole life was devoted to the pursuit of truth. And I felt like, that's something I could devote myself to. I want to pursue truth. So, it might sound cheesy, might sound altruistic or something, but it's always stuck with me that that's what I was after. And it's a difficult road. I'm certainly still young. I'm not trying to portray myself as a guru or anything like that. One of the mysteries of learning is that as you learn a lot, you realize that you don't know a lot. So there's a paradox about learning, that it's both, something that you acquire more of, as you become aware of how much you lack. And I think Socrates said something similar at one point, but anyway, I don't mean to wax all philosophical, but
yeah. And one of the Gnostic heresies, I think, is that you could be, by full knowledge, you become like God. Of course, that's denied to us this side of paradise. Exactly. Yeah.
Salvation through knowledge is really, I think, because it's a kind of pride involved in that, and pride is, of course, an echo of the fall. Mm-hmm. That you can attain a certain level of gnosis, and this is really the kind of temptation that I think Hermeticism and the mystery schools and all that nonsense, Masonry, what that holds out to you is that there's kind of a secret trick path that you can take, and you're going to get the lowdown, and there's an easy way to the path or to truth or whatever. And what have we seen? What is a kind of basic thing that we all know about life? There's not really shortcuts. You know what I mean? There's not an easy way. You can't take LSD and get a shortcut to enlightenment. You can't join a cult and think that the Ray aliens are going to come in a spaceship and take you away on their comet or something. I mean, there's no easy way to do these things. You have to, I think St. Basil said that education and academia is one of the most challenging and most rewarding things to do. And he says that theology is not easy, but it's worth it. And I think, that my life has been immeasurably, it's been very difficult at times, especially when I was younger, but it's been, overall, I'm thankful for that because it's been rewarding. I would not, if I had chosen something like, I'm not going to do philosophy or I don't care about religion or anything like, I'm just going to try to be an actor. I think I would have been very miserable. I would have been very unhappy with what the establishment offers. So after 20 years of conspiracy, I would say that most of the basics of what you learn researching conspiracy tend to be true. I've seen, again, I'm not that old, but from 1998 to 2018, I've seen the world change a lot that in ways that I would have never expected the tranny stuff to happen and for this to be so widespread. I think it's really sad. I think we all ignore this, but I really think the internet is a big part of this because, as you pointed out in lectures and interviews, the immediate, total, and universal access to the most disgusting, degrading porn everywhere is probably one of the chief ways that society is being destroyed. And that's when I think back to the way it was even for me in the 90s, when most people didn't have the internet and even though I was fairly wild in high school, it was still very normal compared to, what I see, teenagers nowadays, the way that because they've had their sexuality.
Open homosexuality in high school.
Yes. And even more bizarre, degrading things. Yeah. With what they're into with furries and all this kind of stuff. And,
I was, my nephew, this was a year or so ago, he was talking to me, he was at a party and just hanging around in this, high school age, and a queer comes onto him. And this is among a mixed group. He's not at a gay party. And he says, no, I'm not into that. And it's clear, and the guy walks away. But the fact that he felt so comfortable in a straight, normal party, as if that would be accepted, and the people around them accepted it as being maybe a little avant-garde or different, but not. I mean, in my day, that guy would have been. Well, I don't know. He would have been. He wouldn't have felt comfortable doing it. But that's another thing, right? And so this is, and was this tolerance? That's good. No, that's not good. And why would he think that some guy standing around? And my nephew isn't. He doesn't play the part. He doesn't look the part. But the fact that these kids, and they're 17, 18, they're so confused that is this what it's become now? That, that this is acceptable at a high school party where, back in the 80s, I would have said, get away from me, you fag. And everyone else would have said that too. And I'm going to say right now, that's a healthier response than tolerance.
I was just, watching, Predator the other night because I don't think I've actually ever seen the full movie. And I was laughing because, within, 10 minutes, Jesse Ventura is like, don't be a bunch of faggots. all these ridiculous one-liners in this, big 80s action movie, but we were just cracking up because, you watch 80s movies and you're like, man, that would never be allowed. Oh, people would go crazy over that, race jokes. But nobody cared about that, and even in the 80s. And now it's that kind of stuff I would have never dreamed when I was first learning about conspiracies and reading about this kind of stuff in my early 20s. I never would have dreamed about that by 2018. It would have been this kind of backdoor, subtle thing like language and social justice warriors and sexuality that would have been the tip of the spear for the establishment's altering of society. But we know, you and I have both talked about together and also in separate talks, that this was planned out in the 60s. How you do this? Yeah, right. Planned Parenthood planned this out. And I remember it's all part of the authoritarian personality with destroying the strong male role model, father figure, but you break the family up, and that's how you usher in the sexual revolution. Yes, the Bernard Berelson memo, and we have the Kissinger State Department Memorandum 200, and these are just inklings into the norm. Which when you read Collier and Horowitz, you'll see that they were Rockefeller's very clear about. I don't know that book does have it's like a section on Abby and her promotion of feminism. I can't recall if it has anything directly on like the promotion of homosexuality, but it doesn't have to, because we already know, from the Berelson memo and other sources that this, the Kinsey stuff, that's exactly what they were doing. So, it's just really, mind-blowing, I guess. It's just, sad. It's also very sad because we're just for the entertainment and the, I'm reflecting on, someone asked me the other day, I was just talking to, I was at work, consulting with a family, and they were a Catholic family, and we started talking, they saw my name, and they asked if I was Catholic, we started talking about it, and, about schools and colleges, and I said, is going to college a good idea still? And, I mean, is it really worth it? Because I just look at the experience that, that I had back in the 90s, but, 80s and 90s, early 80s, late 80s and early 90s. But they really ruin your kids. And people don't recognize it. They don't recognize it. I see my nieces, particularly the nieces, because you send a girl off, and there was a time in early age when it was acknowledged that men and women, boys and girls are different, men and women are different, and single young girls need to be somewhat cosseted and protected from the brutality of life. So they can provide when they can develop and become responsible mothers and provide a domestic household and these things. That's when these sex roles were defined and they're understood as healthy. And now we force them into the office and workforce. And even conservative parents, when they send their daughters off to school, what are you going to do for a job and career? Well, aren't they going to be mothers? No one wants to be a mother anymore. And inevitably, and this is so against the zeitgeist and the liberal idea right now, is I do believe there's an inherent brutalization that occurs with women when they have to go to the office every day and deal with that environment and not come home and deal with the environment at home where they should be taken care of. Because after all, it really is all about the children, right? Not in that, what about the children? But really, because you got to care for the generation that's going to take care of you. And that generation is going to have to be a little bit larger than the one previously. And if it isn't, you get the demographic winter. But when so many people just accepted the fact that women should go out, and this is the Jordan Peterson thing, is that women should go out and have careers, make money, make a difference, Well, what better way to make a difference than is to bring life in this world and raise a nice person and put energy into that person. And, but with the college environment, that's just cut off. One thing is they go to college, and they have, vast majority of them have illicit or premarital sexual experiences, which they all feel guilty of, whether they admit it or not. That ruins them psychologically, or damages them, rather. Maybe it's a better way to phrase it. And they learn this ideology, this feminist ideology, these things. And your tax money, by the way, oftentimes pays for the abortions at the university. And someone was asking me, how do I get out of this trap? And I said, well, it is a trap because one thing is we live in a society that needs certificates and degrees to get certain jobs. So everyone thinks, well, to maintain a middle class lifestyle or
have upward mobility. We need to get, a degree, a postgraduate degree, and get a job. So we need to go. And so they're not going for an education. No, they're still going to get a certificate. Well, really, at a practical, wouldn't it be better off just going to work for a company somewhere and getting job experience and then reading a few books on the way and get a better education that way than going into debt?
Well, you would think, but you've got to have the companies change their policies.
Well, this is consciousness. Yeah. And what I'm saying is, what you really need is, so when people say, what would you do with your kids? I'm raising consciousness for the first part. Because the first step would be having the parents and the taxpayers go on a general strike, not subsidize the universities, and not pay the tuition. Then tuitions would drop rapidly, and they'd have to downsize, be more efficient. They'd be lower. There wouldn't be the expectation of the college degree anymore. So then companies wouldn't have those hiring practices. And that's how the system that's how you deconstruct the system. But as long as everyone's thinking, I'm not the one that's going to challenge this. I'm just going to send them to college. This is the trap. We send them to the university system where they're drugged, they're put in debt. They're debased because they tend the college lifestyle and they have multiple sex partners and these things. They come back and they're psychologically scarred, and then what have you. Then they've been indoctrinated, with Club of Rome type degrees,
Mm-hmm.
And then we're supposed to think this isn't part of a plan. But again, it's one of these things. It is a trap for many people because they think they have to do this because you need a college degree. But the first step is consciousness. Maybe you don't need a college degree. Maybe you're better off working. So if you can't provide a practical, the system works instead of the system working for us to achieve a certain end, we're all working for the damn system.
Right. Until the chain is broken there in some way. Yeah. The cycle, it's going to continue. But I think that you have to try to convince people. And this is very difficult because if people don't have a worldview or a system of belief where they even know that there's right and wrong, they don't care. Yeah. Why should I care what the university system does? I just want my degree so I can make. But you see, this is a trap. This is not. You're not actually winning in this system. Even if you don't give a damn and you think, I'm just going to care about me and my own or whatever. You're not winning in that system. You're becoming the cubicle slave who, is working until he's 80 or 70 because there probably won't be retirement. Who knows? You're working for what's always around the corner that never comes, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just waiting for that vacation. I'm just waiting for my pension. And, you don't even know if this stuff is coming. Mm-hmm. And so you're spending your 60, 70 hours a week, at your, mid upper level management type job that you needed your, degree and now master's. Now you need your master's for the same degree that you could get with a bachelor's, 10 years earlier. It's just getting more and more irrational and insane that I think that, at some point it has to break down. It has to not work. And hopefully, we can continue to educate people, but, it's really up to people, themselves and the decisions that they make. And if you send your children, I was just looking at, somebody had a great piece, it might have been, Matt Forney or somebody like that had a great piece about what happens when you send your girls to universities. Mm-hmm. And all the article was pictures before and after, girls before going to state university and after. And almost every one of them had, like, the starting picture was, gorgeous 18-year-old girl, long hair, feminine, look, 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. And then the end was like fat social justice warrior, purple hair and shaved Skrillex hairdo and, total, they look like, I don't know what they look like a monster, something from a apocalyptic movie or something. Mm-hmm. And that was, I think, one of the most illustrative articles I've ever seen about why you should not send your daughter to college. It was like, just look at what this does. Yeah. And it's because they're fed that ideology of, you've been oppressed. You've been, this is your way to rebel against this, the system. And they're not rebelling against the system. They're doing the very thing the system wants.
And they engage in immoral behavior, and the way they maintain the image of themselves as being good people is social justice warrior crap. You know.
Yeah, I even remember when in my undergrad, several of the campus feminists had by the time that I finished my undergrad, because some of them were in philosophy. So I was kind of in a lot of the same classes as the campus feminist groups. By the time I graduated undergrad, after 5 or 6 years, they had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was just from, abortions or from what, but, it was multiple, campus active feminists had. So I don't know. I mean, people have posited, the idea that your worldview, I mean, I'm not saying that everything, like if you believe and do everything right, you're going to be perfectly healthy. I mean, that's not biblical. Jesus rebukes that, but I'm saying that there is a connection between, not just our health, but also our spiritual health and our physical living. I mean, I mean, you can see this in the process of how girls go from being, feminine and beautiful at age 18, and 4 years later, even physically, they are disgusting and unhealthy.
Yeah. And there's no girl now. I mean, there are, but I'm saying generally speaking, upward mobile, the middle class is just not accepted, to be in your early 20s and have a child. I mean, that's when you should be having a child. Biologically. Yes.
Biologically, yeah. Which is, isn't it interesting that our system is constructed around constantly going against, what's biological, and that we're supposed to believe that our system is scientific. And yet at every point it is, moving further and further away from what is, just basic biology.
Mm-hmm. And it gets us back to that whole, I guess the liberal order of rejecting reality and what's natural and healthy and the food we eat, GMOs, these things, the drugs they take to actually suppress fertility. Reproductive health is actually abortion and contraception. I always love that twist. So
yeah, reproductive health, exactly.
Yeah, so
that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, Jay, have you almost 2 hours? Do you think we covered it?
Yeah, I think so. It was a good talk.
Well, thanks a lot, Jay. That's Jay's Analysis, jaysanalysis.com. He is the author of Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, also the host of Hollywood Decoded. So, Jay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I will mention, I'm not sure when this gets posted, but Tuesday, if this is posted after, I was scheduled to have a debate with Richard Spencer.
Oh, really?
Tomorrow night. Richard said he has changed his mind that he doesn't actually want to do a debate. He wants to do more of a mild version of maybe debate's not the right word, but a contra exchange, like a position exchange of, while I disagree, here's my position on this, Q&A. So he doesn't want to do a JF style debate. He wants to do a counterpoint or something like that. So, if that goes down, that will be tomorrow night, on Baked Alaska's YouTube channel, who is I guess fairly popular.
Okay.
Sort of comedic figure who got popular during the Trump, campaign.
What's the point of contention in the debate?
Right. Well, I've listened to Richard give a lot of talks, and I've listened to him do a lot of debates, and actually the last debate that Richard did on Baked Alaska's channel was with Adam Kokesh, and so it piqued my interest because I debated Adam Kokesh a couple years ago, and actually, although Adam didn't exactly say where he got this argument, Adam actually, I thought, asked Richard a couple good questions that I don't think Richard really answered. Namely about, why, on what moral basis, do you think we should do X, Y, Z, Richard? And I don't think Richard gave a very good answer.